So, this week in the Sacred Gathering, we're going to be looking at one of the Psalms. And while preparing for this talk, I ran into kind of an intriguing quote from the writer C.S. Lewis, which in some ways kind of framed the way I was thinking about it and maybe how we connect it to Christmas. So, this is what he said. He said, "We stress Christ's humanity too exclusively at Christmas and his deity too exclusively after the resurrection. The ancient interpretation of Psalm 8 is a cheering corrective to these tendencies, I assume." So I liked the idea of this being a corrective to maybe the tendency to focus so much on the baby and the humanity at Christmas, and then later on in the Christian year, the divinity and the power of Christ in the resurrection. So let's dive into Psalm number 8 and see if we can kind of pick up that challenge that C.S. Lewis has thrown down for us. Pick up the gauntlet, I guess. Lord, our Master, how majestic your name in all the earth, whose splendor was told over the heavens. From the mouth of babes and sucklings you founded strength, on account of your foes, to put an end to enemy and avenger. When I see your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars you fixed firm, what is man that you should note him, and the human creature that you should pay him heed? You make him little less than the gods. With glory and grandeur you crown him. You make him rule over the works of your hands. All things you set under his feet, sheep and oxen altogether, and also the beasts of the field, birds of the heavens and fish of the sea, what moves on the paths of the seas. Lord our Master, how majestic your name in all the earth." So there's two kind of assumptions behind this psalm and the way it's talking. So the first one is, in the ancient Near Eastern world, they kind of saw the world divided up into kind of two main spheres. One was the earth and earthly things, and then one is what they would refer to as the heavens, which is sort of spiritual things, but also includes the sky and the celestial. They would have seen all those things kind of combined. And this psalm both assumes this, and it's kind of going to be based around kind of following kind of a almost like a moving shot in a movie, where we go from the heavens and heavenly things down to kind of the earth and earthly things. The other kind of part of that that is assumed in this psalm and is based into the structure is, not only are there two kind of basic parts, the heavens and the earth, but there's almost kind of a ladder of being, of a hierarchy in which things have kind of different amounts of power and intellectual capacity, and yet all these kind of pieces of sometimes what you hear kind of a ladder, they're all interconnected and they need each other. This is the older idea of the cosmos versus kind of the more modern view, which is the universe, right, in which everything is physical. So at the very top, we have God, the creator. Below, we have this very vague word for kind of all other things, spiritual beings, so angels and demons, but it also would have included, like fairies and monsters and sea monsters and cryptids. I don't know. It's kind of an other thing, that things that are more powerful and often more intelligent than human beings, but are not God, are not human beings. There's kind of other powers that are out there, right, in their kind of more enchanted worldview. Below this vague word of other, of Elohim, of angels and demons, etc., then we have humanity, which shares in some aspects of the spiritual and of intelligence and creativity and autonomy, etc., and yet has physical being and has the limitations of being a physical being. And then after humanity, you have kind of the land beasts, so domesticated animals, which they would have thought of as a higher, and then the lowest would have been kind of fish and birds and things that are they're part of the air, they're part of the water, places that people can't really go, and yet are part of the created world as well. And the kind of reason that this is important is this hierarchy is humanity bears a weird place, even though it kind of sits in the middle of all these things. Humanity has a very special relationship. Humanity is the only thing that is called in the image of God. And in the Genesis account, which is very much influencing this, God is both the creator, so God is ultimately the powerful one. God is not wrestling sea monsters like in the ancient Near Eastern. He's not defeating chaos so that order can happen. God simply speaks. God creates the entire world from, the angels, the Elohim, whatever, all the way down through the fish and the birds, through the lowest order of humanity. And yet, the lowest order of creation, excuse me. And yet, humanity has this very specific role in the middle that they represent God, and we have a responsibility, a calling. Some of the older translations we get dominion, but it's maybe it's stewardship, and we'll come back to that in a little bit. In the Genesis, God both made everything and gave it to humanity to be taken care of. We have a job, we have a co-responsibility as those with the image of God, and all of that is being played with in this psalm. The psalm is talking about kind of creation in its vastness and its beauty and its complexity. One of the kind of neat images is it talks about the heavens, right? The things that are beyond humanity, the stars and the moon and all those things. And they use a very specific word that has to do with, rather than God just making things with his hands, it talks about his fingers, that it's almost meticulous. The pastor Eugene Peterson, doing his message translation, says something along the lines of that it's God is working on the stars and these vast, huge things. It's almost like a jeweler. There's this meticulous kind of nitpicky aspect, and that is these things that are huge and beautiful and vast and intimidating to us are small and require kind of a very fine touch from God. It's a beautiful image. It's a nice way of showing kind of God's power and vastness. But again, don't miss in the Old Testament, it's not just how powerful God is. It's not just that God is bigger even than the things that intimidate us, like the cosmos and the universe, etc., right? It's that God is creative, not just ordering and taking away chaos, but God is creative, and it expresses in some way, and that the creation is good, and that we share roles in all those things as well. In the Genesis account, we have responsibility for caring for God's creation, God's good creation, God's beautiful creation, the creation that is an expression of God's heart in some way, shape, or form. And so where the modern world, as we've learned more about the sheer vastness of space and in a lot of ways our insignificance in comparison to that, that is exactly where we take it, right? We find that intimidating. We tend to think humanity is clearly insignificant. We're these tiny little creatures on a vast world in an even vaster universe, and we use these images of just about the universe being empty, and a lot of people have kind of come to the conclusion that the universe is a kind of cold, empty place, that we're kidding ourselves that we have any meaning. This psalm makes almost the exact opposite claim. This is a group of people who see the world as designed and recognizes fully how small we are in comparison with the heavens and the stars and those sorts of things, and yet they come to the exact opposite conclusion. They're not staring at our insignificance because of our smallness. They're staring in wonder at the incredible significance humanity has. They're overwhelmed by our significance and our calling, and the fact that we get to have some say and some kind of control and autonomy in caring for this world and making the world, for good or for bad, into something new. And they're in awe that despite the fact we appear weak, whether it's against the heavens or against the angels, the Elohim, whatever, right? We appear small, and yet humanity is a sort of incarnation in the biblical view, right? We're kind of in the middle. We have spiritual aspects. We have intelligence. We have autonomy. We have the ability to reach for the transcendent. We're not an animal, despite that being a metaphor we tend to use for ourselves a lot nowadays as well, right? We have things that think differently than us that we are meant to care for. And yet we are physical beings. We share in the natural world. We have limitations. And so humanity, even in the kind of Genesis creation account, we're a sort of an incarnation, a one foot in both worlds, in the same way that Jesus is going to more fully exemplify humanity later on, being both God and human at the same time, right? We've kind of got an aspect of that from from here we are. And so if we bear the image of God, right, this passage seems to think if we want to understand our own significance, if we want to understand what it actually means to be human, we don't follow the metaphors of the human or of the vast universe in a tiny little thing. We have to know who God is, which is what this psalm is trying to teach, to know who we are in the first place. They're using the creation, though you could use other things as well, to learn about God. And in knowing God better, we figure out our own sense of significance and what it is we're supposed to be doing in the world. I also wanted to talk just really briefly. This passage and the Genesis 1 passage is one that I think gets a bad rap in a lot of circles. Taking care of the world, ecology, is something that's just very important to me. I've read a decent amount of it. I've volunteered a lot around this area. And you often hear the kind of critique that this language, this Genesis 1 language, that humanity is given dominion over the world, is one of the reasons we are in such an ecological disaster. That was the justification that people are allowed to do whatever they want to the world because the whole thing's going to be destroyed and fall away anyway, right? And I don't think that this critique is entirely fair, although passages like this have been used to justify people doing whatever they want to the natural world, just like there are other passages people will use to do whatever they want to other people or people that they think are lesser or people that think are infidels, blah, 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 right? The problem with all of that is we're kind of doing what's classically called code switching, where we take something and use the language, but then we don't follow through on the definition given in the Bible itself. So in this case, we're talking about power, dominion, leadership, etc. But then the definition, it's almost like we're cutting and pasting. The definition the Bible gives for leadership and power and dominion is not the one we're using as we act and justify. And what I mean by that is we tend to think of power as the ability to do what we want, right? We can go strength. You can use power well, or you can use power poorly. But you get to do what you want. You get to force things through. That's what power is. Therefore, if we have power over the world, we can do whatever we want to it. That's not entirely wrong, except the Bible is very clear when power is given, it is always given, whether that's God giving it to us over creation, when God is empowering a king or another leader for a period of time, that power is always given for the sake of serving, for the sake of bringing out the best in that which is smaller than it. That's why God gives such a hard time to kings and rich people and the resourced and the hierarchy of religious types when they are bullying, when they are using that power to benefit themselves rather than benefit those that they do it on the behalf of. And so this word dominion, and you see this in modern translations that they keep changing that translation because it's been so problematic how it's been used, isn't something we need to be afraid of, because the biblical definition has to do with care, has to do with stewardship. Maybe Old Testament language is going to be more of a governor of or a vassal of a great king, because the Old Testament is very clear. The world does not belong to humanity. We do not get to do with it whatever we want to. It belongs to God. And therefore, every choice we make, every bit of autonomy we have, just like one of those governors or vassals or a steward, whatever, is done on behalf of God and God's views of those things, which is a pretty damning critique of so much of what we have done to the world and seeing it as something that we can simply extract resources for our own benefit from, whether that's the natural world or those who are poorer than us, those who have less resources than us, right? We tend to see them as resources, things that we can extract from. And all of that is really hard to justify with what the Bible is doing in places like Psalm 8. So again, a bit of an axe to grind for me personally, and the way verses like this in the Genesis account are used. But again, it's really hard to justify based on actually reading Psalm 8 in places like this. And so here's the question I want us to ask ourselves is, again, looking at Lewis's challenge, how is a passage like this, looking at the vastness of nature and God and the fact that he gives us significance in the natural world and in the world around us, how does this challenge maybe a Christmas that is too grounded and human based? How does it challenge an Easter that is too abstract and religious by incorporating them in some way, shape, or form? And if that's the case, what does this tell us about ourselves as well as about Christ? What does the natural world, what does going into a new year, what does leaving the Christmas season mean for us in light of this psalm, in light of our responsibilities to ourselves and those around us, in light of who God is and what that means about who we are?